Hi everybody, Dan Bailey here with yet another super fun Fujifilm video for you. Hopefully highly informative and mildly entertaining. So last week I shot my first video in a while, and if you watched that you can tell I was a little out of practice. I get pointing at the wrong side of the screen whenever I post the little links up there. And I think that's because when I'm looking at the camera, I'm looking at the mirror image of what I'm shooting, and so everything's backwards. And that kind of confuses me because, you know, if I look in the mirror, I'm not seeing real Dan, I'm seeing backwards Dan. So I wonder, what does real Dan look like? Only you guys know for sure, because I certainly don't. I just know what backwards Dan looks like. Anyway, as I said, that was my first video posted in a while. It was about that new Fujifilm XE5. And a lot of you guys watched it, so I really appreciate the traffic. Also the comments, a lot of you guys commented, and those are always really fun. And I really enjoy that aspect of the whole YouTube thing. I like answering your questions, sometimes with very detailed answers. Sometimes we can get into it, you got an opinion, I got an opinion, we'll go back and forth for a while, all in good fun. So if you've never actually left a comment on one of my videos before, you don't know what you're missing. So this is the perfect time to start, so I encourage you to give it a try and see what happens. Anyway, today we're going to talk about lenses, specifically the 3 Fujifilm X Series lenses that I typically carry these days that usually live in my photo pack. So I'll tell you what those 3 lenses are, I'll tell you why I like them so much, show you what I do with them, and also talk about some of the similar focal lengths that you could substitute if you don't have these exact 3 lenses or if you want to just try something different. Before we get started though, I want to tell you guys about my online course, Mastering the Fujifilm Autofocus System. Now I read on a place called the internet that some people think that the Fujifilm system is not good enough for capturing fast action and shooting birds and tracking action and stuff. What can I say? I've shot with numerous models over the years. Today I'm shooting with the XT5, and I gotta say, with every single XT model I've ever shot with, even like the XT10 and XT20, XT50, I've always been able to nail the subjects that I like to shoot. And of course a lot of that comes from practice, because photographing quick moving subjects is one of the most challenging things you can do with the camera. However, if you know what settings to use, how to optimize those settings for the types of subjects you like to shoot, and how to disregard the settings you don't need that might confuse you, then you're going to be a much more proficient photographer. And that's what I teach you in the course. It's 2 hours of content. I also give you some very valuable tips that are not necessarily camera dependent, but they can really help you nail those fast subjects and prepare yourself for shooting that kind of subject matter. So a lot of people have said the course has been really helpful for them, so I encourage you to check it out. And you can find that right here. Yeah, right up here. Okay, let's talk about lenses. In my mind, lenses are the most important tool in your entire camera kit. I like to think of lenses as compositional tools that allow you to frame a particular scene in the way that you want, that appeals to you, and that allows you to capture the scene in a way that matches your personal vision and the message you're trying to convey with your image. And part of becoming a proficient photographer is knowing how each lens sees the world, and then knowing which one to use when you walk on a scene and say, hey, I like this, I want to shoot it this way, I want to get this message across, I want it to feel this way, I'm going to use this lens. You know, and sometimes you'll experiment. You know, you might come onto a scene and try a couple things, but what you don't want to do is carry a huge bag of lenses and go, oh, I'm going to try this one. Well, that doesn't look. Well, I'm going to try this one. Okay, no, I'm going to try this one. By then you might have already lost the scene, lost the light. So if you can get to know intimately how each lens sees the world, you're going to be a much better photographer along the way. As I said, I'm going to show you the 3 lenses that I typically carry. And it's 3 because I think that's really all you need when you're going out in the world, especially if you want to go light and fast. You don't need a huge bag of lenses. You need wide, middle, and long. And to me, that's the most important consideration when you're getting together your gear and saying, okay, what am I going to take with me? I need my camera, and I need some lenses. I need to cover my wide, middle, and long. That can be 3 lenses, that can be 2 lenses. Depending on the zoom, it can be 1 lens. For me, it's typically 3 lenses these days. Regardless of what I'm shooting though, and which lens I'm using, I'm typically thinking conceptually in terms of front and back. If you're ever unsure about how to photograph a scene, think foreground, background, front and back. You have usually a foreground subject, and then you have something in the background that it can play off of, some other subject element or a number of elements or an entire environment that can play off of the main subject and give it some sense of context, give it a sense of place, and create those relationships that make a photograph so much more powerful. And I think this will really help you better conceptualize your scenes and in the end walk away with a stronger photograph. As I said, when I think of lenses, I typically think wide, middle, long. So we're going to start with wide angle lenses. By the nature of their construction, wide angle lenses show a very broad view of the world in front of your camera. And so for that reason, we tend to think of them as the ideal lens for shooting landscapes. They're also great for shooting environmental portraits and capturing anything where you want to show a subject and an environment at the same time, especially if you want to get a little bit close and show an intimate view of your main subject and then have everything kind of be behind it. My current favorite wide angle is this little Fujifilm 16mm f2.8. It's light, it's actually very light. It's super compact, it's got a little lens hood, it's weather sealed, not super expensive, and 2.8, it's pretty fast. So this has been my wide angle of choice for quite a few years with my X Series cameras. Another inherent feature in their design is that wide angle lenses typically have a very wide depth of field. That's easy to remember, right? Wide lens, wide depth of field. So this often means that you can show a scene that's sharp from front to back, all the way from your foreground subject all the way to the background. So this lets you hold focus on a subject that's relatively close all the way back to infinity, and that can be a really compelling look for an image, whether it's a landscape, a portrait, nature shot. I mean, there's so many examples that you can think of when you have a scene that's sharp all the way front to back, foreground to background. So this is one of the many ways I like to use wide angle lenses. And this technique allows you to give your photos a more three-dimensional look. And yeah, that's one of the most compelling features of a wide angle lens. That front to back, close to far, gives you that three-dimensionality for your imagery. And that can be a really cool look. Now, the closer you are to your subject, the more you'll exaggerate how big that is and how dramatic it looks in your frame. And this can be a really strong compositional tool. Now, obviously with some subjects, it can look a little weird. Like, you don't want to get wide angle lens right in someone's face, because that is going to look strange, because their nose and their whole face will be kind of distorted and stuff. But if you back off just a little bit, you can really accentuate that larger subject in front of the rest of the scene. And again, you can do this with just about any type of subject you can think of. So yeah, the closer you get, the more you exaggerate and accentuate the foreground subject that you're shooting. When you combine that kind of framing technique with a more shallow depth of field, then you get some really interesting effects, because your subject will be tack sharp and really well accentuated in front of the camera, but then the rest of the scene will be kind of soft and a little bit more blurry. So the focus will definitely be on your subject, and the stuff in the background is actually kind of drops even more into the background, and that just helps to tell the story even further in a more stylistic way, but still keeping the focus right on your main subject. So like I said, my current favorite, actually for quite a long time now, is the 16mm f2.8 weather sealed lens. And there are a few other X Series lenses that fall into the wide angle category. You have 23mm, 18mm, 16 1.4, and oh yeah, the new 8mm which ultra wide angle lens, which I've seen it, but I haven't actually used it in the field yet. But I think this would be a real sweet lens to use for outdoor and travel and anything like that. Super light, super compact, and very, very ultra wide. So again, you can get really close to your subjects, accentuate that scene, and then also show a very wide amount of information to cover that background. Or if you're shooting in a very confined space, inside a tent. Back when I shot rock and ice climbing, I used ultra wide angle lenses quite frequently. And those are my favorite, because you really don't have any place to go. You're kind of there on the cliff, or you're hanging from a rope, not much room to move around. And so that wide angle lens makes sure you could frame the scene how you want. Okay, the next category is normal lenses. And we refer to these as normal because the way the construction of the lens works, it gives you a scene that has the same relative angle of view and sort of spatial depth of field that our own human eyes see. So my favorite normal lens these days is the 35mm f2. And it's pretty much the lens that lives on the camera. It's like my little body cap for my X Series cameras. It's small, it's fast, it's light, it's stylish, it's weather sealed, and focus is relatively close. So I typically like to use normal lenses for, number one, showing the normal view. You know, if there's a scene that's, I like the way it is, I don't want to kind of mess it up with any exaggerated distortions or compression or any special effects. I just want to shoot it as is. That's the lens I'll use, a normal lens, that little 35 f2. For a lot of us, a normal lens was the first lens we used, and maybe the only lens we used for a while when we started with photography. My very first lens was a 50mm f1.4, which when you convert film to the APS-C sensor is basically the same look. 35mm APS-C lens, pretty much the same view as the classic film 50mm lens. So I've had that view in my mind for a long, long time, and it's kind of baked into my brain. And that's how you want to think about lenses. You know, you don't need to carry around all these lenses. Nothing wrong with trying a bunch out, but in time you'll choose your favorites and you'll come up with the ones that you love the most. And the way they see the world will become baked into your creative brain. And it'll just be part of your inherent style of photography. You'll come across a scene and go, oh, I'm going to do this with it because I know this lens will look at it this way, and that's the kind of scene I want to shoot. So yeah, from that standpoint, a normal lens is kind of the what you see is what you get lens. Now, one important tip when shooting with normal lenses like that, you generally want to stay close. They start to lose their strong creative characteristics when the subject gets too far away. Then you're just shooting stuff way out there, and you sort of lose the magic of what that normal lens can do. And part of that is because you can't really focus on anything. At some point, everything out there is at infinity, and everything's in focus, and there's really no way to help the viewer decide what's important. What am I looking at? What am I focusing on? What's the subject? It's just a bunch of stuff. So when shooting with normal lenses, I generally like to stay relatively close. And as with any lens, the closer you are to your subject, the more shallow your depth of field will be. And you know, again, that can offer you real creative stylistic effects with real slim, narrow focus. So yeah, keep that in mind. When shooting with normal lenses, stay relatively close, especially when shooting portraits. I like to abbreviate my subjects, and this is an ideal lens to do that, again, when I'm somewhat close, so I can take advantage of that shallow depth of field. If I'm that close to something, I might not be able to show the whole scene, but that's fine, that's perfectly okay, because abbreviation is one of the strongest compositional ideas and concepts you can use in photography. You don't need to show everything to your viewer, because they'll be like, okay, there's that, there's everything, wow, I'm done, I'm looking at the scene, I'm done, next picture. But if you only show them part of the scene, their mind will fill in the rest. In fact, I did a whole video on abbreviation in photography. You can find that right here. See how quickly I snapped right to that? Link's right up here, it's not over here. So in a sense, you don't want to give your viewer everything. You want to only give them part of the story so they can fill in the rest in their own brains, and it gives them something to think about, something to consider when they look at your scene. Because we all have different imaginations, and so there are any number of variations a viewer might consider when imagining the rest of your scene and building the rest of the picture in their minds. And that's kind of cool because we all have a different way that we see the world, and that means that when you abbreviate a subject, you give the viewer an opportunity to give it their own personal interpretation. And really, that's what art is all about, right? When any kind of art that has a boundary, like a frame, say a painting or a photograph, what lies outside the frame can often be just as important as what's inside the frame, because the magic actually lies outside the frame, because that's where the viewer's imagination starts to run wild. There's a few other normal lenses in Fuji's line. You've got two different 35mm, the f2 and the 1.4. You've also got the 27mm pancake lens, which is a fantastic little lens, and tiny, tiny little lens, like you almost have nothing on your camera. And some of the zooms cover that middle ground too, like the 16-50, the 16-80, 18-55. The 16-55, although that one's quite a bit bigger and heavier, I personally wouldn't want to carry that every day. I'm shooting this video with the XC 16-50, which is actually a great little lens. It kind of lives on my X-T4 as a dedicated video lens, and so I've actually used it outside shooting as well. Okay, we're going to move on to telephoto lenses now. Telephoto lenses bring your subject in up close and they magnify the whole scene. One of the most common ways to use a telephoto is to shoot something that's very far away, you zoom way out, and bring that up close so it's not so small in the frame. In a sense, you're treating it like a telescope. We'll talk about some of the other ways that I like to use telephoto lenses, but generally I like to break them into two subcategories, short telephoto and long telephotos, because each of them imparts a slightly different look to your imagery. Of course, if you have a zoom lens, you've got short and long in the same thing, and so that's actually what I use. My favorite long lens these days is the 70-300mm lens. I absolutely love this lens. I did a video about it, which you can find right here, but this thing is just amazing. It replaced the 55-200, which I used for years, and this thing is so much better. It's faster autofocus, it's sharper, it's weather sealed, it's just a phenomenal lens, and it's not very heavy. Now, if you take the lens hood off, it's pretty compact. It'll fit in almost any kind of camera bag. I generally leave the hood on. It also has this cool lock switch here. So if you got this around your neck and you hit the lock switch and it's kind of bouncing around, the barrel isn't going to slide out. But one nice thing is you don't actually have to undo the lock button to make it zoom out. It's like automatic. So you can lock it so that it doesn't slide, but as soon as you twist the barrel, it unlocks itself. And that's a really cool feature. I love the 70-300. It's, as I said, it's such a killer lens and ideal for outdoor and travel. It's light, it's relatively compact, it's very sharp, it has a really close focus up to like right at 1 meter, even closer if you use the 1.4x teleconverter. It has reasonably fast autofocus for shooting birds and fast action in sports. A couple of my absolute favorite bird shots of all the time were shot with the 70-300. And earlier in that particular day, when I shot these photos, I was using the 150-600. Both great lenses. And again, that's where the skill and the knowledge of your gear and the lens and your technique comes into play. Because, yeah, with this sort of budget lens that's not very fast aperture, I was able to capture these extremely fast subjects, dead sharp, really tricky scenes. So yeah, that's what you get in my autofocus course. So for all those reasons I just mentioned, it's such a great lens for outdoor travel, anytime you don't want to carry a whole bunch of heavy gear. I have a number of other telephotos. I've got the 50-140, I've got the 100-400, but this little 70-300 goes with me almost all the time. So here's some of the things I do with my telephoto lenses. They're great for head and shoulders portraits. In fact, short telephotos have often been the standard, the gold standard for shooting head and shoulders portraits. And that's because our ears are too far back from our noses. And so a short telephoto lens compresses those features just a little bit to give us more appealing looks. Overall, they render the facial features in a very pleasing way, and with a shallow depth of field, you can focus tack sharp on the eyes and let the rest of the face or the background blur into a soft wash of tone and color, and that separates the subject from the rest of the scene and really accentuates them right there in the frame. Telephoto lenses are great for working across the street or across rivers or across any kind of medium distance where you can't get any closer. Like I said, that's the most common way to use a telephoto, is to zoom way out, treat it like a telescope, and bring your subjects in close so they're not too small in the frame. Shooting telephoto landscapes allow me to isolate very specific parts of the scene and just accentuate those. And like I talked about the abbreviation factor, shooting with a normal lens. Well, this is the same thing, but with even more magnification, even more detail. You can focus even more closely on those details and the small bits of the scene and leave out everything else, which again inspires your viewer to imagine the whole rest of the scene. The compression features of a long lens really loom those backgrounds forward, and that gives you this wash of out of focus color and tone as your backdrop. You no longer have a background, you have a backdrop. And that's a really compelling way to frame a scene. You can combine these sharp details of your subject with a stunning backdrop. And the thing is, like, there's so much magnification, you can move just a little ways and you might be able to reposition an entire shadowed scene or entire part of your background that lines up in the most compelling way against your subject. So in this way, a telephoto lens is more about accentuating your subject instead of showing them in relation to the whole scene. Although technically you're having a relationship with the background, it's just a much more limited and dramatic background that kind of accentuates tone and color and shape and shadow rather than showing more details of the environment. Your details are up close, the background is just there for, as I said, color, shadow, tone, emotion, drama. Long lenses also have much more shallow depth of field, especially as you get closer or zoom farther away. So again, tack sharp subject against a very blurry background. Almost always a winning combination when you compose your photos. And you can still look for additional elements to play off your main subject, maybe just one or two things in the frame. It just might be that those things are out of focus or abbreviated. So you could have a very abbreviated subject and a very abbreviated background. So that's like the double whammy. There's a whole lot to think about in that image. And the more you can engage your viewers' brains and imagination, you suddenly invite them to be an active participant in the whole process. You can also use a long lens to eliminate things in the scene. Maybe you got a distracting background, you want to zoom in, kind of crop out specific things that are too distracting. Ideal way to use a zoom lens. Other choices, the 50, the 56, both of those kind of fall between short and telephoto lengths. Maybe even 50mm might even border on the higher end of a normal lens. But you can still use the telephoto techniques with the 50 and the 56. You've also got the 90, which is fantastic. The 90 is so sharp and so fast. Amazing lens. So there are times where I'll go take the 90 instead of the 70-300. They're about the same size. So yeah, 90 is a real winner. In fact, I did a whole review of the 90mm lens. You can find that on my channel right here. Fujifilm has a couple of all-in-one zoom lenses that go from wide angle through the middle range all the way to the long range. 18-135, the new 18-120. That's a really good lens, especially if you shoot video. And there's the XC50-230, which is, it's a plastic lens. It's not weather sealed, but it's actually a surprisingly sharp little lens. I was on a trip, someone had one of those. It's super lightweight, so if you don't want to carry very much weight, but you want a long lens, that 50-230 is worth looking at. Okay, so there you have it. My X-T5 16mm f2.8, 35 f2, and 70-300. I just put them on my little kitchen scale where I measure my flour when I'm making bread and pizza and stuff. 57 ounces, which is 3 pounds 9 ounces. That's my camera kit. 3 pounds 9 ounces for a pro body and 3 great lenses that are going to get me wide, middle, long, and give me all of the options I need for capturing an immense array of creative imagery when I'm outside in the field. So you add in the weight of a small pack, another pound or so, a couple Cliff Bars, you have a 5-pound pack. Okay, you add another liter of water, another jacket, you're still way less than 10 pounds. That's pretty remarkable. That's one of the huge benefits of this system. The cameras and the lenses are relatively small. And over the long run, that makes a huge difference. But you guys already know that. I don't need to tell you that again, right? This isn't a commercial. You already know that. Okay, that's all for now. I hope you found this video helpful. Threw a lot of information at you. I may expand this and make an entire course on lenses. So let me know in the comments if you think that'll be a good idea, if you might be interested in something like that. Either way, leave me a comment, subscribe to my channel. If you are a Fuji shooter, you want to check out my best-selling ebook, X Series Unlimited. It's the #1 guide that allows you to get the most performance and have the most fun with your Fujifilm camera. You can also find me on social media and Patreon at Dan Bailey Photo. You can visit my blog and website as well. Thank you so much for watching and for your engagement and your continued support of this channel. You can also leave me a super thanks down here if you so choose. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Have fun with your Fujis out there, and I'll see you next time.